Join me for a conversation with game designer Matthew Whitby.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Hey guys, if you want to check out some of my RPG resources, just head over to dicegeeks.com and you can find some of them there. My books are aimed at helping you cut down your GM prep time and having more fun at the table. So I would greatly appreciate it if you checked some of those out. You can also find them on Amazon.com and DriveThruRPG.com by simply searching for Dice Geeks, all one word. Just dice, just geeks, squished together. Now, guys, I have a fascinating interview today. My guest and I have a wide-ranging conversation that takes in everything from Dungeons and Dragons, game design. We also step into philosophical territory a little bit here and there, all aimed at helping you run better games and be better players when you're sitting at the table. So here is the interview. My guest today is a game designer who frequently publishes on the DMs Guild. He is also the host of the Dungeon Masters Guild House, which is a YouTube interview series. Matthew Whitby. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you, Matt, for inviting me. Yeah, I'm again. It's so weird being a podcast host myself. It's always weird being on the other side of the table.
No, I feel the same way when I get interviewed as well. Why don't we just start off? I always like to ask first-time guests, how were you introduced to Dungeons and Dragons?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I've always kind of said that I'm very much a 5th edition baby. Mm-hmm. So it kind of stemmed from during like my days in school. We had my friend had an older brother who had essentially a collection of all the sort of D&D books, and it was kind of easier for him to kind of get us all together and kind of just start rolling dice. So I kind of that's pretty much how I got started. And then from the weekly campaign, it eventually got to the point where I started DMing myself, and kind of everything's kind of his history from there. Running a lot of like homebrew campaigns to now sort of trying to run. Actually, was it funny enough at the time? So yesterday I started running Ravenloft for the first time, the Curse of Strahd. So yeah, I'm getting a good fix of D&D in.
All right. Well, what do you think it was about it that captured your imagination?
I think it kind of stems from being naturally fascinated with games and the medium of video games, that it allowed you to do things that many other sort of traditional digital role-playing games just didn't really give you that sort of freedom. You could do anything. Obviously there was the rule system in place, but I found myself, immediately drawn to like creating my own characters and going along with the story. And it's hard to compete with that, that sort of like social aspect of just, being sat around a table with like all your friends and just, the highs and lows of dice rolling.
No, absolutely. I agree. I think that's, when I ask people that question, I hear a similar story, that it's just the freedom and the creativity that it's that role-playing games, that tabletop role-playing games allow. So that is interesting to hear. Now, you said you kind of started being the dungeon master pretty quickly. Was that right?
So it wasn't actually. It wasn't until like more recently. It was more. I was always sort of a player, and it was funny enough, the kind of opportunity arose for. I spoke about, again, I was telling a group of people about Dungeons and Dragons, and they were like, "Yeah, we should give it a go." And then the moment you mention Dungeons and Dragons to a group of people who are curious, that inadvertently automatically puts you in the role of Dungeon Master, because it's like, oh, it's your idea, you should be able to run it, right? So it kind of unraveled from there, and that's kind of actually was it. So that sort of DMing experience is kind of eventually what led me to kind of publishing on the DMs Guild, because I was, running my own sort of like, I guess, like it was spaced within the Forgotten Realms, but there was sort of like, some sort of setting agnostic adventures that I thought, hey, I could, write this up a little bit and maybe throw this up on the DMs Guild. And yeah, I guess, that was like two years ago, just about. The kind of the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, I do want to ask you a little bit more about running games, of course, because this show is geared to kind of helping people learn how to be better game masters. But, as you were mentioning there, you said you were playing, you had played a bit longer before you had started running games. Something I don't think we often hear about. What would be some good advice for a player? What makes a good player at the table?
I think it's always, it's there's a good amount of, like, I guess, appropriate table etiquette is the kind of polite way to do it and stuff like that, which is, and which actually lends itself to both being a player role and a DM role, which is knowing when to allow, players to shine, and making sure that everyone has, equal opportunities for, a limelight. And, again, it's easy to kind of get caught up and be like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do that. When sometimes it's kind of like, a good player tip is sometimes you can just sit back a little bit and, if there's the class case of what is it, if there's like, a lock, rather than as a wizard going, oh, I can just fireball the lock, or, I can just blast it away, or whatever it is. You'd be like, oh no, we have the rogue who's been sulking in silence for the last 3 minutes. Maybe I can nudge them and get them involved.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I think there are always people who are a little bit maybe timid or something, if it's perhaps their first time playing, or that's maybe just their personality. And then somebody who's been playing for a long time may forget to let them have their character moment sometimes.
I guess another way of looking at it is if you set them up for a victory, then it immediately, and they win, if they try and do something really risky that you've kind of helped them set up, then it becomes a group victory. It's celebrating the successes of the table, and brings about a more sort of it's collaborative storytelling. Like I said, if it was like you and just the DM and like a one-on-one sort of thing, then I think you probably should lead the story a little bit more. But the more you can sort of do to sort of bring everyone in and let them enjoy the highs and lows, because you also have the flip side where if you're like you're nudging the rogue saying, hey, you should go pick that lock, and then it's a trapped lock and they die, then you've earned a certain amount of guilt but that's again that's the game. That's all the fun of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what have you learned about being the dungeon master since you've started running games?
Oh, I want to hold off, because I have a rant about doors.
About doors?
About doors, yeah. I don't know. Listen, I don't know. I'm not even going to stop myself. I'm just going to let myself go into it.
Okay.
I don't know what it is about. Maybe it is just when you're playing with new players. But putting a closed door between the party and their destination is essentially like a halting stop sign to action. And depending on the kind of like situation, I don't know what it is. I think players are always expecting doors to be sort of like gotcha moments, or like it's always a trap, or it's always there's something going on, that when the group come up to a door, they again it halts all action. So one of the things that I like to play around with is just managing ways to sort of make doors less of the barrier that they are. Even if it is as simple as like, rather than finding a closed door, just have the door automatically slightly ajar, or have make it a door with a window in it. Those exist. So it's not like they come across like a wall that they can't see through, that anything can be on the other side. And as the players become more experts and stuff like that, it does give you a little bit more freedom to play around with them. So like if you present them with a door with like a window in it, It could be like, an illusionary window, and that way, even though they can see through it and be like, oh, there's nothing there. But again, I think from the get-go, that kind of expects the players to think that every door is going to be a trap. When really, again, doors shouldn't be that scary. I think, again, in the world of D&D, there's a lot of things you should kind of be worried about. And I think doors should be, again, they should be low tier.
No, that's interesting, because I don't think I've thought about that, too consciously before. But you are right that the doors do, kind of present some problems every once in a while. And first, I'm totally taking the window and the door as an illusion thing, and I'm going to use that the next time I run a session. I'll tell you that.
Another thing, I'm further perpetuating the fear of doors.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know, if you're solving your problem here or not, but I'm going to totally do that. But yeah, that is interesting. And like I said, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been running games since I was 9 years old, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And I usually find in Dungeons and Dragons, I think there is more of a fear of doors, right? Because you're in the dungeon, there is more of a fear of doors, and especially if the first door that they encounter is trapped, then that usually leads. I think I see the party kind of always then like checking doors, like reaching. Like sticking their sword through, they get the door open and then they kind of stick their sword through to see if there's another trap on the other side or something. And so, I have played with it in different ways. Like, I think some of the easier ones that I have done is just the first door is trapped and then none of the others are trapped. So but they still do kind of then are a little bit more hesitant. Mm-hmm. And that does kind of slow things down. And then other ones, of course, that I've done is none of the doors are trapped until like the last door, and then it's trapped. And then they just open it because none of the other doors have been trapped, and then they get caught.
I guess the one thing that is kind of to consider is obviously is why the door is trapped. It's one thing to kind of like, put into, and particularly if you do have like a particularly brash party, so that they're the ones who, if there is a dragon in the final room of the chamber, they are sprinting through. Having a trap at the first door can sort of encourage them to be a little bit more cautious. So despite my rant against doors, they are a tool that can set the pace of a like a dungeon in particular, but again, if you're just putting in a trap or something just, because you feel like it's something exciting, you have to kind of be cautious that, this could, again, turn what was meant to be maybe like a 2-hour dungeon into maybe, a 3-hour or, 2.5. It's just another thing to sort of consider.
Yeah. And that is interesting as well. I think the time management part of the, of running, kind of the dungeon is, if they are going to check every door for traps, it may just add another, it may add another 5 or 10 minutes onto each door. But if you have, 20 doors or something, then that's a lot of time.
The dungeon is actually like a door emporium.
Yeah, door emporium. Yeah. So that's my takeaway. So I'm either going to make a dungeon without any doors, or I'm going to put a door everywhere and see what happens.
Yeah. Fantastic. No, there you go. It's there's no escaping the doors.
Yeah. And yeah, but like I said, I have never really thought about it too much like that, but I do now that I'm looking back over, some sessions and things that I have run. Yeah, that doors do present just a strong opportunity for the party just to stop. Just for the the action to kind of grind to a halt.
And I mean, there's multiple ways to sort of get around it. It's I guess it's just more of like, again, I'm here to raise awareness about doors.
Yes, and you have done so. Yeah,
and I think again another like kind of solution is if the players are hesitant of there being a creature or a monster on the other side of the door. Doors work both ways. just have the monster open the door. just, if the player's like, oh, what can we do? Just like, say, whoever was in it, that they finished their shift of patrolling and now they're returning to, the barracks, and that's where the party are at the moment, to have them open the door and go, oh, this is a sudden encounter.
Yeah. And actually, that reminded me of something one time. It wasn't Dungeons and Dragons. It was a Star Wars game that I was running, but the party was kind of made up of some new players, and they were in like this Imperial base, and they came into this room and there was a locked door, and they started having this discussion about like, should we open the door? Should we do this? And there's like nothing behind them. There's a door there. So of course, like right after like 8 minutes of them pointlessly discussing whether they should open the door, I just have the door open and a squad of stormtroopers come into the room, right? Because it was just a waste of time, and they could have just opened the door with their R2 unit or whatever. And it wasn't meant to be some big thing. I just happened to say, oh, well, there's a locked door there.
Yeah. So you get doors, man. You got to be careful.
You got to be careful with doors. All right. And so, you had a few, little tips there about how to make them a little interesting. Like I said, I'm totally stealing that illusionary window in the door. But now I am a little concerned. Yeah, anytime then they see something, then they're going to think they have to like detect magic or something before they go through.
That's part of the balance. Is the players are wasting spell slots to try and work out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then they realized they could have used that later on. No, so that is fascinating, and like I said, I don't think I had thought about it that consciously, but doors do present a lot of problems. So thank you, Matthew, for making me aware of that a little bit more consciously. And
like I said, we're accepting donations to the raising awareness about doors within RPGs.
The D&D door fund or something. Yeah, no, that's so cool, and that is something really interesting to think about. But now, I mentioned in the intro just a few things that you are involved in, but you are also getting your Ph.D. in game design, isn't that right?
Yeah. It baffles me that I'm this far in things as well. But yeah, no, I've kind of I went to university in England, where I'm from, in case my accent wasn't perfectly clear of that. And it kind of I studied computer games or computer game design, and it kind of over time my interest in sort of understanding the academic side of game development kind of grew. And my current where I am now, I'm doing a PhD in trying to understand how games challenge people's perspectives. So that's essentially my thesis topic, and I'm 2 years in out of 4. Okay. just over the halfway point. And what's kind of been interesting is looking at how games challenge the way people think or feel. Has in its own weird way been kind of useful in running my own sort of D&D sessions. Because you look at the sort of trends for how games purposely subvert expectations, and how you can sort of lend that to more dynamic moments within your adventures or campaigns. I think that some of the kind of best ones are the playing with particular tropes. Again, there's a whole wealth of fantastic sort of games out there that play with expectations. But one of the things that kind of, I guess my PhD has kind of been uncovering is the more impactful moments are the ones that, I guess, marry the intentional thematics of the game with the mechanics. So again, the classic mention of Ludo narrative harmony, where the gameplay and the story both kind of go hand in hand. And And with D&D, it's a little bit again a little bit more challenging to try and find a balance between the themes and the mechanics when obviously the mechanics are quite baked in. But you can definitely sort of begin to sort of implement or homebrew some systems, like for example things that establish or monitor relationships with certain characters or with factions, as they sort of had within was it like Waterdeep Dragon Heist, that can bring about the players having those sort of, you know, they feel as if they are trying to manage, you know, these ever-changing relationships between these different factions. At any moment, one of them could try to turn and betray them, or you know, who's really working for who, like who's really in control of the situation. But yeah, there's basically, I think I've rambled, but there's a lot to it, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a lot of follow-up questions.
Please, no, by all means.
Yeah. So you said how games challenge our perspectives. What do you mean by that?
So for the purpose of my thesis, I've kind of defined perspective to be the way you think or feel about something. Okay. It's, you know, your particular attitudes or beliefs. And the study that I'm kind of wrapping up at the moment was taking a series of 8 games. So things like Gone Home. There was also Undertale. There was This War of Mine. There was Papers, Please. Actually, Papers, Please is a really good example of a game that can challenge the way you think or feel, because the systems in that game in particular is essentially it's a paperwork simulator. You are a border agent for I believe a fictional city that is under a sort of a very oppressive regime. And it is your job to either approve or reject people as they come through, and sort of you check through their paperwork. The interesting thing about that game is you are sometimes given sort of moral choices to, you know, a couple comes through, the husband has the correct paperwork. He says, my wife is up next. Do you mind just, you know, letting them through? Whereas obviously the wife appears with incorrect paperwork. And then you're sort of stuck with that moral choice. What Papers, Please does really well is the fact that the moral choice doesn't actually give you any mechanical benefit. In fact, more of the opposite. And because the game is trying to, you know, convey this idea that you are a citizen living in such an oppressive regime, that trying to, you know, break the rules is going to be more detrimental to you individually than it is, you know, to actually try and do the, you know, the right thing. And again, it lends itself to D&D kind of depending on your party, but the occasional putting in kind of the sort of moral situations where the players can try their best to do the right thing, but knowing it comes at a cost. Those sort of storylines are, again, it won't lend itself to every party. The sort of hack and slash party, kind of better served in a dungeon, may not want to, you know, question the morality of humanity and what it is to be good. But some other campaigns, they may, you know, particularly if you're dealing with, again, it's fun to play around with clerics and paladins. You know, the people of faith who you know believe they by following their particular dogma of their deity, are confronted with these choices. And particularly if I think like a good example is, you know, saying something within like Baldur's Gate. You know, being there's a reason why Baldur's Gate. I was about to give spoilers for Descendants of Avernus. I won't. But Baldur's Gate is notorious for being quite an evil place. There's not the nicest number of people, and having particularly like the players living within Baldur's Gate and perhaps being, you know, was it members of the Flaming Fist, who are very sort of quick to judge and kind of come down with a sort of iron fist on any sort of disturbances. It gives you a good amount of freedom to see, okay, well, how can, if the players were members of the Flaming Fist, how do they balance doing what is expected of them versus, you know, people in just unfortunate situations that just need the right sort of help. Yeah, again, again, each question you've given me a bit of a free rein to just go rambling.
Well, that's the way I like it.
Yeah.
No, absolutely, and I do think you're right that depending on your game, some people are going to be more into the moral choice kind of situations than other ones. But I think it is. I think you can always at least slip one or two in here and there, even if your group is just like, hey, we're just here to have fun and we're not thinking too seriously. I think that is something that is unique about a tabletop, RPG, that you can work that in, and people who say they're just there to just do some hacking and slashing or just to roll some dice and to kick back for a few hours, kind of at some point are can be drawn right into some moral choice, and they're right there with it.
And what I kind of think is kind of fascinating about what D&D allows in particular is that the smaller the moral choice almost becomes, depending on kind of the situation, like, for example, if there is someone in danger, at the lower end of the, like levels 1 to 5, it's, life or death. It's when it gets up to, the tier 3s, the tier 4s, when you're coming up to like, level 20 characters, those even very small, potential moral choices kind of almost have like more significance. It's, almost like the Superman effect of, having all this power to, potentially stop the entire city from being destroyed or whatever it is. And right in front of you, there is something that would take, 30 minutes to save, again, let's say like a caravan full of orphans. And it's like, it would be quick but it's classic sort of trolley problem that you kind of present, which only sort of comes about when the players are, these powerful, when the stakes are more personal than, sort of the alternative, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a ton more follow-up questions for that, but I'll try to stick to the original one a little bit. So, your PhD, you said you were focusing on computer game design, and I think everybody understands why that would be of focus. How does computer game design, or learning that, then influence your game design for a pen and paper like D&D?
Oh, so I guess kind of what the interesting thing is what I love about I guess when you think of like what D&D is, or like tabletop RPGs are, they are kind of like the that's what I call them, the weird amalgamation of being both a author of like a book and a programmer. Yeah. And while I was sort of like making games and sort of doing my degree in sort of programming and sort of like game development, you learn the sort of, the appropriate language and syntax for, writing like a particular game, of like, like checking particular like skills and things. So for example, like if you were to have like an RPG game, it would be like, okay, to use this ability, you need to check the player's stats or whatever it is. And then while I was doing that, there was always an interest in, telling stories, and I would write fiction and, obviously role play while I was, playing like D&D and all that. That when it comes to playing my own, again, like being a DM or writing my own sort of like products, it's that perfect middle ground where the two kind of meet. Because the one thing you notice if you've read through any of the hardcover adventure books is that there is a balance of both. You have the sort of the not fluff text. I think that the sort of text explaining who this individual is. But then you also have like, the mechanical crunch of like, okay, well, in order to discover this person is lying, you need to do like an insight check. And, those sort of like, if this happens, almost like, if statements of code. So, I think again, I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly how it's helped, but I think just, experiencing, the whimsical nature of game development and writing on the side has kind of set me up nicely, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know I've talked with some other guests kind of about how one of the appeals, and I think we mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, kind of the freedom of the tabletop role-playing game. And I think, with a computer game, right, some amazing games, incredible games, but there's always the time when, you go back to the one NPC that was there at the beginning of the game, and they say the same thing over again. And where that doesn't happen in a tabletop RPG, right?
Well, I suppose if the DM's getting a little bit tired.
Well, yes. Yes. Well, that's very true. I've had sessions where they haven't said anything because I was just like, "What? I don't know. Who are you talking to anymore? I need more caffeine."
But no, 100%. Yeah, you're right. Again, unfortunately, with digital media and stuff like that, unless you're dealing with some sort of like procedural, the technology isn't there to have like an endless adventure, and there's always going to be an end or a situation that kind of potentially takes you out of the immersive experience of being in the game. Or I think one of the go-to things is always like in RPG games, when you're presented with dialogue options, that the options you have doesn't always necessarily represent what you want to do.
Yeah.
And it's those are typically quite jarring, especially if you're just like, oh, there's this option which is like politely decline, and that option immediately starts off with you calling them an idiot, or whatever it is. So yeah, it's the freedom is kind of the benefit of tabletop role playing games.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you had. You had mentioned a lot of things, and I'm losing some of them, but it was really fascinating hearing you talk about it, because obviously I don't obviously think about it at such a high level as writing a Ph.D. thesis on it or anything like that.
I'll be honest. I'm mostly doing it so I can be Dr. Video Games, or I'm pretty sure they give me a cape when I graduate. I think I'm just doing it for that, but. Yeah, I think sometimes I feel like I may be a little bit in over my head, but hey, with 2 years to go.
Okay. Doctor of Video Games is a cool title, by the way.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Like I said, if there's any situation where like, oh, is there a doctor on board? I will be there in my cape with a Guitar Hero controller, and I'll be like, I'm a doctor, but I cannot help in any way.
No, that is funny. No, but I was wondering too, kind of one of the things that I had thought of, since you are studying game design at such a high level, do you come across, or do you hear some kind of common misconceptions that people would have about game design? Do you hear anything like that sometimes you just kind of want to talk to them and kind of explode some idea that they have?
Again, there is like a large number of like misconceptions about the challenges of game development, and I think unfortunately was it so that there is sometimes a bit of a disconnect between the players and the developers, and then also I have to fully disclose that there is a disconnect between the developers and also game academia, because it is a case of like necessarily a lot of games researchers aren't necessarily game designers, and sometimes it's the case of trying to read into, again, it gets into the sort of I guess topical nature of games are art in their own right, and you can't necessarily, well, there is room to sort of have a sort of academic understanding of art, but it's more of an art than it is a science. While you can sort of distill a game down to its core components, so much of it is down into sort of the interpretation. I think I'm trying to think of like some of the more basic, like the more common misconceptions, but no, I think it generally it's just that a lot of effort goes into making games, and there's a reason why there's typically like multi-person studios, which is why when people get up in arms about I don't know, like a certain patch or like a certain balancing thing, there's only so much time in a day to try and make a game, and especially when you're dealing with games that have thousands of player base, it's going to be hard to sort of please everyone.
Yeah, I think that makes, especially there, your last point. Should consumers of games should keep in mind that it's just like you're dealing with human beings that are trying to work probably some days way more than 8 hours in the day, and then trying to juggle families and other responsibilities and things as well. It's just like, and it's not going to be perfect because none of us are perfect.
Yeah, and I think from kind of stemming from my research and stuff like that is obviously I'm looking at games in particular that people, or like my participants and people have kind of said this game has fundamentally changed the way I think or feel about something. Mm-hmm. And without, again, I haven't in some of these cases I've not been directly talking to the developer, and it may be the case of like this developer was like up at all hours of the night trying to like perfectly craft this fine-tuned moment, or it could have been, one moment where she's like, "Oh, I should probably put like a tree here," and for whatever reason, the player has had this such profound experience. I'm obviously a little bit of hyperbole there, but it's again, it's. I think it goes in the same way of like sometimes it's so much of the way we interact with the medium of games and stuff like that is it's an equal part what the game is, but it's also what you bring to the game. That allows it to be, so sort of impactful, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that point is really interesting too, because I think we see it in a lot of different, with movies and with TV shows and books and novels as well as video games. I think we do see, when we're writing a critique or we're writing a review about, a movie or a video game or a book, you can kind of find yourself sometimes saying something like, "Oh, this part in this movie, well, that was rushed. They rushed that." Well, I have no idea. That may have been the section of the movie that they spent, 6 weeks trying to get right.
Yeah.
It's,
I don't have that again. It's a classic case of like, again, so much of, again, because I think there is a big disconnect between what people as consumers enjoy and the technical aspects of, putting a film, game, or anything together. Again, it's easy to see the finished product and think, oh, they just did X and Y. Compared to the tireless weeks of trying to make a door work, so you can go back to it.
Call back there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, got a full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think that is a critical point. I think I was first kind of made aware of that years ago when I read. I think it was An Experiment in Criticism by C.S. Lewis, that he was talking about how to be a good critic of, in his case, literature. And it was just a good reminder that it's just like, I have no idea what was going through that person's mind when they made that thing. So that one piece in that video game where I say, "Oh, well, I didn't like that too much. They must have just thrown that together." They might have, the video game team might have spent months working on that. And by the reverse, something that I find very powerful, like you said, I found this one little moment very powerful, and the game designer is like, "I don't even remember doing that," or something like, "What are you talking about?" Yeah. So I think that is always, something that we should be conscious of, that when we kind of move into criticism like that, just saying, "Oh, well, this looked rushed," or "This looked, you can tell they spent a lot of time on this." Well, we don't know any of that.
Yeah. And I think, again, so to kind of like expand out just a little bit of like, the medium of games and stuff like that, is I think in the day and age we're currently living in, particularly as like, my concern is the fact that, again, maybe the two of us as like podcast hosts, I think we put out, podcasts where people hear our voice and, they get to hear us. Again, the nature of what I think what it's called is like parasocial relationships. The fact that people can tune into you listening to us, every week is expected, and you get to, begin to pick up some of, our mannerisms. But at the end of the day, the people kind of listening don't fundamentally know us.
Yeah.
However, it's easy to kind of, feel like you do, because there is that sort of regular, almost contact with someone. And it kind of like stems into, especially when you look at sort of, game projects or like iconic figures within game development. So the sort of people who one-person development teams, or I don't know, like I guess the other end of the spectrum is like YouTubers, where you interact with them on social media, you see all this sort of the way that they are. But at the end of the day, it's like it's there's always going to be a little bit disconnect between what people present and who they are.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got a little deep there, didn't we?
I was thinking that was very deep, and it's probably it probably explains some things going on in our various societies. Kind of the idea of the celebrity, right? We can perception of that celebrity becomes reality when, in fact, the reality of who they are is hidden from us unless we're over at their house, talking to them or something like that. It's just hidden from us.
Yeah. It's like, just like right now, it sounds like we're having, a really sort of amicable conversation. But before we hit record, I was just yelling at you. I was just, I don't know what it was. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, but I said some, again, in reflection, I said some horrible things.
And of course, Matthew is joking, for any listener out there taking us very literally. but yeah, and that does bring up the like I said, like a big issue in our society. And if the listeners want a deep cut, there is an old movie called A Face in the Crowd, that starring Andy Griffith, of all people, who actually plays a celebrity, and we get to experience that his persona is a very nice country kind of person, but in reality he is not nice at all. Let's just say. And it is a fascinating movie coming out of Hollywood in the 1950s, I believe, and it is a fascinating movie if anybody wants to check it out.
Again, thank you for letting me go on that tangent.
No, that was awesome. I mean, it is pretty deep, but I mean, and I know this is a role-playing game podcast, but I think that, like I was mentioning, I think that has a lot of resonance in kind of modern society, that we often take people's perception of who they are instead of the reality of who they are, in ways that could lead us to think certain things about them, whether for good or bad. Sometimes we think people are evil and they're not, and sometimes we think people are great and they're not. They're not nice people.
I think this is an invitation for everyone to, like, the DMs around, to somehow implement a NPC that on the surface seems delightful. There's something more to it.
Yeah, and I was just thinking of that, of course, too, and that you could play with that. Yes, that they seem fantastic, and and then they're not, and the reverse, right? I mean, a little bit of a cliche, but the gruff bartender who's always yelling and screaming at people and telling them to get out of the bar turns out to be, a very helpful and possibly even heroic NPC when some big conflict happens. Yeah. No, I think that is fascinating, and it's. I think it's always good to think about something deep at least once or twice a day.
You accidentally slip and fall in the philosophical puddle.
Yes. Yeah. And I do often, actually. but yeah. Well, now I did mention that you publish on the DMs Guild. And, I do want to talk about a few of your products a little bit and let you talk about that. You had mentioned a little bit that you had started, as soon as you started running games, that you had, you decided then to start publishing on the DMs Guild. Was it a pretty quick, kind of decision there that you made?
No, I think it wasn't until, so my first product I posted out was Cravenhole. which essentially is a sort of setting agnostic. It is essentially a small sort of town or hamlet that is notorious for having essentially, a very large graveyard. And that was kind of what I was running through, my players with, who were, all sort of like friends on my PhD. And it was kind of the case of like, I kind of hit a point where I was like, hey, I found this, I found something similar to there is a tool called Homebrewery, which is essentially an online text editor that allows you to create content that looks very similar to, official D&D products. And I found a version of that that I kind of liked. And I was like, oh, it's quite easy to kind of, sort of like begin sort of writing up my notes. And yeah, I put together this sort of like, adventure guide of like, all the locations and all the adventures that my group had gone on. And I just sort of slapped it up on the DM's Guild without hiring an editor. Again, in hindsight, that's probably my my biggest shame. But it's the case of, in reflection now that I've been, publishing on the DM's Guild for, coming up to like 2 years, is the fact that, this was my first step. It's been a sort of fantastic journey in getting involved in a whole host of collaborations and meeting. Again, the DM's Guild community as a whole is incredible. So many nice, talented people. I could spend the rest of the podcast just kind of speaking their praises.
Right. Well, and then one of your products that you put out is Volo's Guide to Getting Murdered.
Yes.
And I think I heard you talk about this on another podcast. Why tackle, a famous character within the D&D lore?
So what's kind of interesting about the DM's Guild is obviously every product you kind of put out there. Obviously, the Wizards of the Coast and DriveThruRPG. So DriveThruRPG is kind of the website, the mother website that kind of hosts everything. And Wizards of the Coast all take a royalty cut, and it equates to 50% of all sales. But the kind of caveat to that is with Wizards of the Coast taking a cut, they give you access to the IP. Again, many of the settings and hardcover books, you have free reign to do what you want. And again, I guess my kind of mindset, and especially for people who are writing on the DM's Guild, is you have permission to use these iconic characters. In fact, again, whether you use them or not, you're in a way you're paying to use them. So I couldn't think of anything sort of better than to take the lovable for some people, the highly detested for other people, and kill off Volo. I thought he seems like the perfect person to kill.
Yeah, and I publish on DriveThruRPG pretty frequently, but I've only published one title on the DM's Guild, and it was probably ill-conceived, and I certainly cannot afford to have an editor, at least on that product, because I didn't know what it was going to do. But
I was going to say another thing as well, that again, what I've kind of learned through progressing through the DM's Guild is the fact that editors and stuff like that, it's normally typically done on a royalty share percentage.
Oh, okay.
And most editors typically take up to like 10%, which, so if you think about the maths and stuff like that, is like obviously the website itself takes 50%, the editor takes 10%, and then that kind of gives you the remaining 40% to, and I get it. I guess so it's more the case of the motto I have on my podcast in the amount of times that it pops up is always hire an editor. Again, they're abundant and they are worth their weight in gold.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear that it's a royalty share. See, there's just some parts of the DM's Guild I'm trying to catch up and understand it. So that's why I had been kind of following some of your interviews and that.
Yeah, no, I've got an in.
Yes, you've got an in. Yeah, you may get some random emails from me asking you a few questions.
No, by all means. Again, and that's kind of what's great is the fact that myself and so many other people are so open about trying to bring more people in. You don't have to look much further than the I guess seasonal RPG writer workshop, where it's essentially a program that kind of helps people get their first publication up on the DM's Guild. So yeah, no, there's so many. I guess this is an open invitation to anyone listening. when I hand out my contact details to you all. Anyone and everyone is free to, swing by and ask me some questions.
Okay. And now, before I ask you a little bit about kind of what makes a good adventure and some of the things that you're writing a little bit more. So if somebody wants to publish on the DM's Guild, like maybe even before they have an editor, what's one important thing besides having an editor that they need to know before they kind of, maybe even before they start writing?
So I think, again, one of the things that they have from the DM's Guild and that you kind of can download is I believe it's the Wizard of the Coast style guide. Mm-hmm. And basically it is a document that kind of outlines how particular wordings are done. So it includes things like, how do you correctly phrase a skill check? How do you correctly, again, to keep things kind of consistent? And that, again, that's kind of like a big thing is I kind of, when I first started writing, I was using, again, the hardcover books, and 9 times out of 10, you can kind of copy the sort of mechanical phrasing of some of those books. That's kind of an important thing because, again, immediately it kind of allows your product to appear consistent with, what the customer base is kind of accustomed to. Other sort of, again, there is so much, but I think fundamentally is like a good call, I guess, piece of advice is that when you release your first product and stuff like that, obviously there's a whole range of things that could happen. It could be an overnight success. It could get middling number of sales. Number one is obviously don't tie your success to the number of sales you get. If you are writing a product that is enjoyable for you to make and is something that you want to see in the world, that's kind of the best way to go about it, and particularly trying to chase sales. On the other side of the coin, if you are somewhat financially minded, one of the best way to sell a product is to release a new product. Just because as your catalog gets bigger and bigger with each sort of new release you have, people just naturally gravitate towards checking out your other stuff. So it's more of the case of don't let your first products necessarily dishearten you from continuing, because just keep running.
Yeah. No, I that's fantastic advice, because yes, the first, if I would have judged sales by my first product that I put up on TTRPG, I would not be doing any of the things that I'm doing now.
and
it didn't go anywhere.
and vice versa. Obviously, I've had the privilege to chat with some people who have had those sort of overnight successes, and again, it's difficult because they encounter the problem of every product they have is being held to a higher standard. And if their second product doesn't reach the same success as their first one, it's a whole different bag of emotions as opposed to the sort of slow and steady thing. So I think, again, if you enjoy it, and I think that's one of the most important things, because for most of us it's a hobby, and there's a few people who have the privilege to eventually turn that hobby into something of a full-time job, but it's slow and steady. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's key too, is just if you enjoy it, if you enjoy creating, things for role-playing games and you're having fun with it, why not publish it and try to do something with it? Yeah, absolutely. Now, I do want to, I know I've had you on for a while now, but I do want to ask you kind of a big question. A lot of your products, they do seem to be adventures. Mm-hmm. What makes a good adventure for Dungeons and Dragons when you're sitting down to write it up? So, I kind of have like a particular template that I kind of like to use for all like my adventures, and that's normally just handing the things like the headings and the skeleton of the document. But the number one thing is to always be aware of the fact that you're writing a adventure that is going to have player agency. Again, I think it is easy to kind of fall into the idea of wanting to tell a story, but the kind of one of the kind of best ways is to try and write an adventure where you have a sort of almost predetermined series of events that would happen if the adventuring party didn't exist. And then once you kind of have that timeline of the worst case scenario of like, okay, the Lich who's planning to end the world, this is their their 3 to 4 step plan. And at what point could the adventurers kind of impose themselves and change the course of action? That's a good way, because again, it's making it a player-driven adventure, and that kind of again, giving the player agency is kind of what keeps them involved.
I think player agency is always huge with kind of published adventures. I think I know there were some old school ones that kind of just were like, you can't turn left now. You got to go right or something. But yeah, and I'm glad to hear, somebody who writes a lot of adventures. I'm glad to hear that that's like one of the kind of the top things that you're thinking about is player agency.
Two sort of like smaller ones that I kind of have is one. It's very appealing as a DM and also adventure writer to have secrets. But was it my one of my editors, was it RP Davis? He once said, "Don't have a secret unless there's ways to find it out." And that's the best thing. It's like necessarily you don't want to put things like secret doors or hidden compartments and stuff like that always behind a skill check, because if failing the skill check means the adventure halts or doesn't just ends there, then that's probably a bad skill check. And secrets are fun to uncover, but it's at the end of the day, it's like, if there is a secret that the party doesn't find out, what is the purpose of it? Sorry, my second one is there is there's a fascinating article out there somewhere that I'm forgetting the name of the author who wrote it, who talks about the 5x5 act for dungeon design, which is it's kind of talking about a system how for every core adventure that you have, having it split into 5 parts is a good it's kind of like a sort of more traditional story beat of like having the to in order to beat the big bad at the end, here are the start of the adventure, the end of the adventure, and kind of like 3 steps in the middle of like what you have to do. That kind of paces the adventure in like a nice, almost more organic sense that you're not rushing to the end, and the players feel like they've had to do a good amount to sort of overcome things.
And your point about the secrets is well taken. I think you had mentioned you just started running Curse of Strahd.
Yes.
I had just a couple months ago, I had finished running Curse of Strahd, and it was like a year-long campaign that I ran. And I usually don't run a lot of published adventures. I usually do a lot of homebrew stuff. I create a lot of my stuff on the fly at the table, or when I'm thinking about, when I'm watching a movie or thinking about stuff. And so one of the things that I really did struggle with running Curse of Strahd was there was some really awesome details in there. I couldn't figure out how to get them to the players. And that may just be, like I said, I hadn't run a published adventure in a number, probably like 5 years or so, maybe. And I, don't really specialize in running published adventures too often. What I usually do with published adventures is I take bits that I like.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the best way. It's like in the same way that, like, especially when the adventures I write, I don't write them kind of expecting them to be played exactly as they're written all the time. Just because, again, the nature of, like, sometimes it's a DM trying to find something that they can sort of just cram into their adventure however best fits. But there are so many exciting encounters, locations throughout the hardcover books that just sort of, as you mentioned, just sort of pulling them out and just giving them like a little paint over the top. It's no longer, or was it Strahd? It's Trad. I must admit that probably needs a little bit of workshopping, but maybe you could get away with trot.
I know what you're saying there. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I said it was like 5 years since I had ran a published adventure. I think it'd probably be more than like 15 or 20 since I had run a published adventure, like kind of exactly, kind of just right from the module or whatever. But, and of course, my Strahd campaign ended up, I'm always thinking my players are going to now meet somebody else who's played Strahd, and they're going to say things like, "Oh, yeah, when you fought the Kraken, what was that like?" or whatever. and I'm just like, "Oh, well, that's not in the book. I had to add that because the characters became so powerful. I had to like throw in some extra things."
Yeah. Like that was it. Two groups' experience of a hardcover book is never going to be the same, and I think that's kind of like a tell of like a decent DM to be able to sort of be flexible and take the adventure wherever it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I know I've had you on here a long time too. We haven't even mentioned you have the Dungeon Masters Guild House, which is your podcast video, that's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so essentially, it's the Dungeon Masters Guild House was an excuse for me to kind of get like haggle and get some of the amazing creators on the DMs Guild to kind of sit down and chat with me. So yeah, it's a weekly podcast where we just sort of sit down and I kind of pick people's minds about their sort of creative process and the kind of nature of how they design. Which has kind of been good. Again, it's been great for me because I get to sort of give back to the community that's kind of been so kind to me, and I get to learn stuff, which works out pretty well. Turns out interviewing a lot of these sort of best-selling creators on the DMs Guild, you pick up a thing or two.
Yeah. And I've listened to a couple, and they're really interesting interviews there with the creators on the DMs Guild.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Now, like I said, I've had you on here a long time. I could keep asking you a ton of questions. It's the problem I have with most guests. I could talk to anybody about role-playing games like all day. So where can people find the Dungeon Masters Guild House? Where can they find your adventures and your supplements that you create?
Yeah. So obviously, if you do a search on the DMs Guild for Matthew Whitby, and the same on YouTube, you would find all my DMs Guild products, as well as the Dungeon Masters Guild House. But again, much like most people on the internet, I'm probably most accessible on Twitter, and you can find me there at Whitby. Geez, I can't even say my own handle. At Whitby Writes, because my surname is Whitby and I write things. And there, you'll get weekly updates whenever a new episode goes live or whenever I'm teasing a new product. That's again. I think I have something in the works that is going to be coming out soon. TM, it's in the developmental pipeline. So okay, I can't give a fixed date just yet. But it's Curse of Strahd based, and it makes good use of the Taroka deck for some procedural generation of adventures.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. So again, I've got a bunch of talented people involved in it. So follow me, at Whitby Writes, and it should be coming out soon.
Well, I should have mentioned this will probably go live in a couple months. So
so go get it now. It's out.
There you go. Well, I will make sure that I put links to the Dungeon Masters Guild House and to a number of your adventures in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So people, anybody who's listening right now can go there and check that out. I will also link up your Twitter and anything else that is relevant. So anybody who's listening right now, if you just find the show notes for this episode on dicegeeks.com, you will have all the links to Matthew's amazing creations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Well, now, Matthew, like I said, I could keep asking questions, but I should respect your time. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Again, thank you so much for the letting me on and have it again engaging in that philosophical question of, do we really know who we are?
Yeah. All right, guys, there you have it. Oh, man, I had such a great time speaking with Matthew today. It was awesome, and I hope you enjoyed it. As I mentioned, I have provided links to his podcast, the Dungeon Masters Guild House, as well as a number of the adventures he has published on the DMs Guild. Trust me, you want to check some of these out. They are creative, they are fun, and they provide a ton of information to help you run better games right now. All right, guys, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of the show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what I am up to here at Dice Geeks. Also, guys, if you enjoy this show, please consider supporting it in some way. That can be as simple as liking or subscribing or reviewing or rating the show wherever you are listening to this podcast right now. Those things help the show immensely, and sometimes all it just takes is just a few seconds for you to press a button. Now, if you really enjoy the show and you want me to keep making episodes and keep putting out these interviews each and every Wednesday, well then you can head over to patreon.com/dicegeeks and learn how to support the show financially there. That would be incredible. Now, guys, I hope you learned a lot from the conversation today, and I hope you will tune in next Wednesday for another great interview. But until then, keep gaming.